There have been several meta-analyses and large studies which they basically found that the women who avoided sunlight had more than double the risk of all-cause mortality, so death from all diseases, than the women who actively sought out sunlight. The difference was so strong that the women who avoided sunlight had similar all-cause mortality as the women who were in the sun exposure group who also smoked cigarettes. So that the avoidance of sun exposure, in other words, is literally on the same level of magnitude of the risk of smoking cigarettes.
Hey there, my name is Matt Maruca. I'm the founder of Raw Optics, a company that produces premium light therapy products. So taking advantage of the science of light to improve health, well-being, energy, mood, and so on. I'm also the creator of the Light Diet, a simple protocol that anyone can use to improve their health based on the science of light. The following is a fireside talk I gave at Healf Experience 2026, an amazing conference event in London. And in this talk, I speak about a variety of topics relating to the role that light plays in health, why light is something that we should be considering, the benefits of sunlight, the risk of modern artificial light, some of the nuance which no one except my scientific advisor and myself have been discussing. The talk was called Light as Medicine. And with medicine, you never would take an unlimited dose. The dose makes the poison, the dose makes the medicine. And this was the central theme of my discussion at the Healf Experience HX 2026. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching.
I've introduced your background, obviously with Raw Optics, with your understanding of how light can harmonize us, and you have a very unique understanding of health. Can you tell us, just for some context, what your personal health journey has been, so we can gain the understanding of how you've got to your unique understanding of health?
When I was a young kid, I had a variety of different health ailments like gut issues, allergies, and headaches. That led me to alternative medicine. My mother, she was very forward-thinking, and she was always purchasing organic food. So she decided to take me to a kinesiologist, like a naturopath, who did this kind of muscle testing where they put things on your gut and pull your arm, like hold, and you try to resist. But in the end, my symptoms weren't completely fixed. By the time I was 13, I just started reading everything I could on the internet. At the time, one of the things I read was from a top paleo diet blogger. It said basically 80% of health is diet and everything else is in the remaining 20%. And so I really believed this, and I don't think this is true anymore, and I really warn people against believing this. But what happened as a result of that belief was I became so obsessed that I could heal all of my issues with diet. And so when I made some progress, but there were still some lingering symptoms, whether with my energy or allergies or the like, I thought if only I were stricter, then maybe I would get better. So I ended up going stricter and stricter. But at a certain point, I felt so deprived because I was 15 and wanted to go out with my buddies and eat tacos or whatever. And I couldn't do any of that. Then I came across the work of some people talking about how light affects our health. To put it simply, the pitch went something like this. So imagine you're driving a car and all of a sudden it's misfiring and it's blowing black smoke and you can't accelerate. You might think, okay, well, I've been putting in regular fuel, so maybe I should upgrade to premium. Maybe I should add some fuel additives to help clean out my tank and everything. So you do that, you pay extra, put in the fuel additives. These are like food and supplements, by the way. And then you start driving and the car still has the same problem. You drive off the lot of the gas station and you still have the exact same issue. Car won't accelerate, black smoke, misfiring. Like, all right, well, now I better talk to a mechanic because clearly that didn't work. And the mechanic says, yeah, your spark plugs are all worn out. Let's fix that up. And then your car's fine and then you go back to regular gas and happy days. So the thing is, what I came to understand and believe is that so many people, most of us in the health and wellness world, are trying to solve a broken engine with better fuel. The engine, there are mitochondria. So we're trying to solve these damaged engines with just changing the food. And I'm not saying we shouldn't eat healthy food, I eat well, but there are so many other factors that affect mitochondrial health. And the key thing is that the mitochondria being the engines, they process our food. They determine how our food is utilized. So if the engines aren't working properly, then you could eat a perfect diet, but you're not going to be getting the most out of that diet. You can be spending tons of money on healthy food, you're not going to be getting the most out of that food. In fact, you could still be sick even eating a perfect diet. And we'll get into some of the topics that affect this, but one of the things I learned was that being exposed to blue light at night, artificial light at night, and this is 2015, this is a long time ago, especially in this regard, it was very, very niche. Blue light at night disrupts your body's circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is approximately 24-hour cycle that synchronizes our body's internal functions with the regular changes in the external environment. The idea is that you have to spend a lot of energy consciously to survive, doing things like running away from a lion. It would be a lot harder to survive if you also had to spend energy on consciously coordinating millions of reactions inside of your cells. So your brain and body fortunately take care of that for you via the circadian rhythm, which is controlled by light from the sun. Anyway, well, it turns out we've quite messed it up. But anyway, being exposed to all this blue light at night disrupts the natural release of melatonin. And melatonin is one of the body's most important antioxidant, anti-aging, and anti-cancer molecules. So if you're on your phone at night, blasting your brain with blue light before bed, you're disrupting the release of your most important repair molecule and your sleep. You might still sleep 8 hours, but you're not going to sleep as well. And then your cells don't work as well. The mitochondria don't work as well. So again, back to the food point, you could be eating a perfect diet and your cellular engines aren't working well. And there's so much research behind this. I'll let Con take the mic back and then we can dive into it a bit further. But I got into this world and it completely changed my view on everything and led me starting a company, and things have evolved quite a bit since then.
And so from there, if we zoom out, right, we're talking about light as medicine. If I don't know anything about light, why should I care? Or why should I be interested in the effects that light have on my health? So I could flick on a light at home and I just say, oh, it's just a light, it doesn't really affect me. Why should I be interested in the effects of it?
I think I just gave one good reason. So if you are exposed to artificial light at night, it's disrupting your body's natural cellular repair mechanisms, which are very important. So many people focus on things like detox. Well, when you sleep, it's when you heal. It's partially when you detox, you clean out your cells. If you're disrupting the most fundamental system, like why do we sleep when it's dark? Or I should say, why do you sleep when it's dark? Because the sun's gone, basically. Like this is the time biologically we've evolved to rest. And so if we blast our brain with blue light, then we don't get that natural signal to start winding down and sleep. So light is the main driver for our sleep cycle, sleep when it's dark or wake when it's light. Now, there are other animals that are nocturnal and their biology is totally adapted in a different way. But contrary to popular belief, people think like, oh, I'm just a night owl. It's like, no, not really. You're not a night owl. Your circadian rhythm is just disrupted. There are different perspectives on this. I'm more of the camp that there's chronotypes and all this. That there are also studies showing that people who go into nature and camp, within just a weekend, their circadian rhythms fall back in line. They sleep more than an hour and a half earlier consistently. They wake up earlier. Their cognition's better. They're more refreshed. Everything's working better. It's even stronger across a week. But, you see a huge effect in just a weekend, which correlates with our eyewear, like the lenses we have. People wear them the first night. Their Oura ring sleep score goes up. Yeah. Not the second or the third, but the first. And it maintains this effect. But anyway, another reason people should care, not just speaking about artificial light, is that there have been several meta-analyses in large studies, which no study is perfect, right? Always some flaws and shortcomings, but really statistically significant, like a 29,000 women study out of Sweden in around 2017 by a researcher named Lindqvist and his team. And they basically found that the women who avoided sunlight had more than double the risk of all-cause mortality, so death from all diseases, than the women who actively sought out sunlight. Now, they may have, this is the caveat, they may have also had other healthy lifestyle practices, but the difference was so strong that the women who avoided sunlight had similar all-cause mortality, which again means like your risk of dying from heart disease, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, et cetera, as the women who were in the sun exposure group who also smoked cigarettes. So that the avoidance of sun exposure, in other words, is literally on the same level of magnitude of the risk of smoking cigarettes. So you avoid sun, you smoke cigarettes, they're both roundabout equal, according to almost 30,000 people studied over decades. So you should probably care about sunlight. Avoiding sunlight increases your risk of many cancers, dozens and dozens, maybe even more than 100. Getting too much sunlight also increases your risk of certain skin cancers. There's a lot of nuance.
We'll get into that as well, that synthesis concept, because somebody might hear this and go, well, let me go out into the sun all day long.
So are you guys convinced you should care?
Yeah. Okay. And so you talk obviously in a lot of your work about the different types of light, right? There's a lot of different types of light that come from the sun. What are these broad different categories of light and what are their effects on our health?
Okay, so yes, there are a lot of different portions of the light spectrum. So light is one of the fundamental properties of physics, which even physicists, I think, don't fully understand. In other words, they understand the laws of physics, but if you go deeper and deeper and deeper into theoretical physics, like Henry Huberman was speaking about, I'm not a theoretical physicist, but there's always this question in the end, like we don't really know what is happening at the deepest level. But from what we know, light is an expression of one of the fundamental physical forces, the electromagnetic force. So basically, it's a transmission of a specific type of energy, and there are two different waves. There's an electric wave and a magnetic wave, and so the electromagnetic spectrum is a vast amount of different energies, from X-rays, which are X-rays and gamma rays, which are extremely powerful photons. On the other side of the spectrum, you have infrared. You have near infrared and far infrared. Infrared A, B, and C. C is the furthest. And then you have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and so on. So that's the light spectrum. So now, if we want to talk about how these different ranges are relevant for our health, because I know I just wanted to do a bit of a physics deep dive, but basically, the shorter wavelength light on this side, so ultraviolet A and B, have very interesting effects on, for example, nitric oxide. So I'll just touch on a few, just to give some examples. So nitric oxide is a very important molecule which UVA light in particular releases from our skin, and it causes vasodilation. So our blood flows more easily, which reduces blood pressure, which is really good for health. And I would extrapolate this, and I don't think it's a big leap at all, to say that, well, when we lived in nature, that's how our body worked. We were outside. Our entire biology evolved under the influence of full spectrum sunlight. And so this UVA light caused this natural relaxation in our vessels so that blood could flow more smoothly. Now we look at people and we say, oh, you have high blood pressure, you have hypertension, you have this and that. And yet we're all just living inside buildings with glass, which is filtering out this light. We're under artificial lights that don't recreate the same effects of the spectrum. So is it that we have these problems, or is it that we're just disconnected from the thing that we evolved in and that made it so that the problems didn't exist in the first place? I would say that's the case. So UVA light has a big effect on things like nitric oxide, also on hormone production and so on. We have UVB, which is responsible for vitamin D synthesis. Most people think that's the only benefit of sunlight. It's not. In fact, there are studies showing that when they dose patients up with vitamin D from a pill, they don't get all of the effects of sunlight, the beneficial effects that are observed in studies where people actually get sunlight. So UVB is responsible for vitamin D, UVA, nitric oxide, and other effects. On the longer wavelength side of the spectrum, we see what I'm sure everybody here has heard of, red light therapy. It's not just red, it's also near infrared. It's photobiomodulation, so using light to modulate biology and cells, which also can be done with every other color and wavelength of light, not just near infrared and red. But anyhow, this range has been observed to have significant beneficial effects on cellular water. So it literally kind of stirs, it causes water molecules to oscillate. So it's like stirring the matrix, the space around cells. And when this is, for example, if you've ever put a cube of sugar in water and you just let it sit, especially if the water's cold, if you stir it, it dissolves a bit faster. If the water's warm, the molecules are jiggling, it dissolves even faster, even if you don't stir it. So when we're in sunlight, especially getting near infrared light, red and near infrared, it causes the water in our cells and around our cells to jiggle, to oscillate. And why is this good? Well, a huge part of all metabolism is the crossing of certain substrates across cell membranes through diffusion. So often passive, meaning it's sort of happening without energy being input. By just being exposed to infrared light, it's increasing the rate of diffusion of important molecules both in and out of cells, which means increasing metabolism and increasing detoxification just by being exposed to light, which jiggles the water in your cells. So that's one of the effects of near infrared, and nobody's talking about this except my scientific advisor, Alexander Wunsch, who's, as a side note, I've been working with, and a lot of the content of this talk is from Alexander Wunsch with the W. He's a German photobiology expert who's been studying how light affects health for literally decades, coming from the world of frequency and energy. And there's a device downstairs that you put on your earlobe, which basically stimulates your vagus nerve. He invented something like that in the 80s, which you could program to all sorts of cosmic frequencies, because he's both very scientific and interested in sort of outside of the box thinking. Anyway, so he's, to his credit, speaking about these things at a level that nobody else is, and we're fortunate as a company to work with him. So anyway, beyond the water jiggling, I'll call it, to put it simply, we have this effect where red and near infrared light also increase mitochondrial energy production. So the powerhouse of our cell, which we spoke about earlier, which is responsible for basically allowing us to live, its function is directly improved just by being exposed to certain wavelengths of light. And I would assert again that this is our default and natural state. This is what we evolved in for, billions of years, hundreds of millions of years. And now that we've gone indoors, we're starting to have all these problems. And we're like, what's wrong with me? All these things are happening. It's like, well, you went inside, you never got outside. Of course, you're going to have the X, Y, and Z issue. But then we have all these, okay, now I'm really on a rant, but we have all these specialties in medicine that are studying the very isolated downstream consequences of all sorts of different things. I think upstream, one of the most important factors is light and how it affects our cells. One more important point is that there's this is separate from light, but related. I'm from Philadelphia, United States. There's a doctor at the University of Pennsylvania and Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, one of the top children's hospitals in the whole world. And he's studying, and he has been for decades, mitochondria, so these powerhouses of our cells. And his colleagues, around 1958, DNA was discovered. So since then, and he was a young guy in school at that time, all of the fields started studying the nuclear genes. So, everybody knows here that when your parents get together, they share their genes 50-50, and then that makes up your genes, right? Well, so they were aware that in our cells, for every one nucleus with the genes from our mom and our dad, there are approximately 1,000 mitochondria. And every single chronic disease they looked at, the mitochondria weren't working optimally. So whether it's diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, autism, neurodegeneration, cancer, et cetera, every type of autoimmune disease that hasn't been looked at, they're seeing problems with mitochondria, which makes sense because in order to run a complex system, it requires a lot of energy. Think of like the United States government. It takes a lot of money to run a government, right? If the tax base was reduced by 50%, they'd have to cut a lot of programs, right? Now, they might cut the things first that seem the least important. Well, in biology, the things that are least essential for survival, in other words, the pinnacle of our development to take the most energy, is the neocortex, human brain. And so you have, unfortunately, children being born whose neocortexes don't work. And, this is effectively autism. And the mitochondria aren't able to deliver the energy necessary to power these systems. So another reason why I think people should be really concerned about light is because it's one of the single most important factors for regulating mitochondrial energy production and repair. And there's 1,000 of them in every human cell. So if you have 50 to 100 trillion cells in a human body, multiply that by 1,000, I don't even know the number. It's a really, really big number. You have a lot of mitochondria. So they matter. And so does light.
Yeah. And so we see that across all the different spectrums of light, across all the different functions of our biology, light and biology are clearly very closely linked. And so if we were to go back 1 million years, and if we were to go back to the 1600s, we probably had quite an efficient light environment. What happened around 200 years ago, around 300 years ago, when we started industrializing? What happened to our light diet, as you would call it?
Okay, it changed a lot. So may I step back to the million years where you started?
Sure.
Okay, it's going to be a while. So, the vast majority of our recent evolution as humans occurred in trees because we were primates. So for a lot longer than we've been humans as we know ourselves, which is estimated to be anywhere from like 500,000 to 1 million years that we were Homo sapiens sapiens. Before that, there were all sorts of other different hominids, and before that, we were maybe more like chimpanzees. There's all sorts of different theories. But anyway, we lived in trees. And in tree, you're basically completely surrounded by which color? Green. So green because of chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is the pigment, it's the pigment in the chloroplast, which is an organelle in vegetation, in vegetable matter. So if you look, I don't have slides, but I'll give you an idea here. So if you look at the light spectrum of chlorophyll, so what chlorophyll absorbs and re-emits, it essentially absorbs all of the visible light and the shorter wavelength light I was speaking about earlier, which is the part which can be harmful for our cells. But it reflects, meaning puts back out the near infrared. It's called the near infrared plateau. So if you look at a light spectrum, it goes like this, from basically ultraviolet to violet to blue, peaking around greenish, and then to red, near infrared, yellow, orange, and so on, and near infrared. Now, as soon as you shine, if I take my spectrometer and I point it at a leaf or put it under a canopy, you basically see all the visible light reduce massively and UV, but the near infrared stays. So basically, we evolved in an environment for a very long time where we were bathing in green light, which we know is balancing. That was the peak of the visible spectrum, which was still reduced a lot. But tons of near infrared, which is basically healing for ourselves. So people talk about like nature baths and so on, going just into Hyde Park. I was there this morning bathing in green and near infrared light under a tree. We're actually taking a near infrared bath when you're under a forest canopy. So it's really, really good for you. It's not just that you're in nature and it's beautiful. It's really, really good for ourselves. And that was our primordial light environment, the green forest or jungle canopy. Then in the evening, we had fire. You know, once humans or hominids before us mastered fire, always in the evening, fire had many, many functions. It protected, it scared away potential predators. It also, as a tangent, kind of made us human because it took all of these hours after dark where we would just be in the dark and going to sleep and turned it into a sort of social time where we started to tell stories and develop language and whatnot. So this is a type of light which is, it sort of supports the parasympathetic system. It doesn't stimulate our hormones because it doesn't contain blue light. So blue light, again, wakes us up in the morning. So if you're sitting by a fire in the evening, it's literally allowing your brain to release melatonin naturally. So your parasympathetic, so everybody's familiar here with your sympathetic nervous system stimulation, and parasympathetic is rest and digest. Great. So then in a similar way, we have a hormonal system. You can either be stimulating cortisol and stress hormones or not. So the first primordial environment, just stepping back, of green was very balancing. We weren't being stimulated by the blue sky and sunlight, direct sunlight, but we weren't being put to sleep. There was enough visible light to keep us awake. So it's very balancing. Parasympathetic is fire and darkness. So that's where we wind down. And then finally, there's the open sky. So in general, as a hominid, you wouldn't go out under the open sky unless you had to, because it's very threatening. If you go out under a blue sky and direct sunlight, you will die within several hours if you're under direct sunlight for an extended period of time without any sort of protection. Like, for example, an old form of medieval torture was to tie somebody to the top of a tower all day and just let them die. So it's like the body can't handle excess heat and sunlight. Anyway, so that's stepping back from that extreme. Just going out under the open sky is stimulating. Why? Well, because you start sweating, and sweating takes a huge amount of energy. Your body has to regulate fluid balance and mineral balance, and for that reason, we make mineral corticoids, which are a part of the stress hormone cascade. So just going in the sun, it activates this whole cascade of stress hormones, which basically allow us to adapt to direct sunlight exposure. So it's a very sympathetic, stress activating and hormonally activating environment. That's the open sky. So we would only really go into the open sky when we had to, which was for hunting, fishing, foraging, and migrating. And you wouldn't be doing that necessarily all day long. And when you were done with your survival tasks, you would generally go and rest in the shade. You weren't going and resting in direct sunlight, except maybe to warm up or something like that. So anyway, these are the three primordial light environments. As human civilization evolved, we basically kept fire in the evening. We moved away from forest, but we created our own indoor shelters, homes. They don't just protect from rain, they also protect from sunlight and heat and cold and so on. So we had this kind of balance for hundreds of thousands of years. It was only in around 200 years ago that we created the first electric lighting. But even then, the first electric lighting still followed the light spectrum of fire, more or less. So if you've seen an incandescent light bulb, it's very, very warm, and it's even quite hot. It's visibly warm, and it feels hot to the touch. You touch the glass, you'll burn yourself. So basically, it has a very low amount of short wavelength light and a huge portion of longer wavelength light, an incandescent light bulb. So it's something that in the evening isn't going to disrupt your sleep. So if you have an incandescent light bulb, it's basically allowing your brain and body to stay hormonally neutral or to wind down. When things started to get interesting was in the 1930s and 40s, they wanted to have, so the first light bulb was 1879, so not that long ago, like 170 years or so. So in the 1930s and 40s, there was kind of a push for more efficient lighting because the more incandescent bulbs you put into a building, the hotter it got. And this isn't good for worker productivity. It consumes so much electricity to produce just a little bit of light. More than 80% of the energy that an incandescent bulb takes in is emitted as heat. So only 20% or less actually comes out as visible light. So they created fluorescent tubes. And fluorescent tubes, I'll spare you the details of exactly how they work, but fluorescent tubes could illuminate a much larger space more evenly. You've all seen them, they kind of flicker sometimes. They illuminate a larger space much more evenly for a lot less energy. And they're colder, so they're also more stimulating for the hormonal system. This is already kind of a step in the wrong direction because whereas in nature, we had a natural change from sunrise to sunset. So there was always a fluctuation. The sun came up in the morning, we woke up, we were stimulated, the peak hit, and then the sun started to go down. When you're in an office building, and any modern office or school or hospital or shopping mall or store you go to today has this kind of often cold white light, which keeps your body in a stress kind of activated state all day long. And this is a big problem because if you're, well, most people, I mean, how many people feel like they're a bit stressed in their daily life? Can I see some hands, please? Come on. Yeah, I mean, so if you're already stressed because of all the things you have to do in a day, I would say that it doesn't make sense to have a light spectrum, which is also chronically stimulating your stress hormones. It's not really helping you.
Why is it doing that? Why is it chronically stimulating? Because what's happening?
So there's blue light, just like the sun. It's because modern artificial lighting was designed to mimic the open sky. And this is the biggest mistake that was ever made. So whereas incandescent, so I went through those 3 different primordial light environments, right? Green, fire, and darkness, and then the open sky. Modern artificial lights basically are designed to mimic the open sky because there's no thought or regard for our hormonal system when modern lighting was designed. It was just how can we put out the maximum amount of efficiency and brightness. So, but the thing is, in the 40s and onward, fluorescent lamps, these blue enriched light sources, so cold white, they were confined to offices and commercial spaces and industrial spaces. So at least the house was still a safe space. And that changed in the 1970s. Was anybody alive in the 70s when you had oil shocks here and you had gas rationing and everyone? Does anybody remember that time? Yeah, I see a few hands. So all of a sudden, the focus for lighting became efficiency and brightness. And that's what it was. And then finally, after 20 years of development, they came out with compact fluorescent bulbs. You remember the little twirly ones? Those were they were a short-lived moment for about 10 years before 3 Japanese physicists mastered the blue LED, which was necessary to produce all of these lights you see now. They couldn't produce bright white light without blue. They had red LEDs, like your radio indicator lights, since long, long, long ago. They didn't have blue LEDs. These Japanese physicists discovered that in the 90s. They won the Nobel Prize in 2014 for that. And the white LED was born. And so now you have, today, the most advanced light source ever produced in terms of the amount of visible light you can put out for the amount of energy you put in. And that's how all light has been optimized. So if you buy a light bulb and you see the A+, the A, or the B or C, the worse the rating, the better it is for you. Because the rating is not based on your hormonal system and your nervous system. It's based on how can we put out the most amount of visible light, none of the near infrared, by the way, which is the healing part of the spectrum, for the least amount of electricity. So it's basically like junk food that you're bathing in all day long. That's another reason to be concerned. So that's how we got here. It's changed a lot.
And so then for that, we're wearing these yellow glasses, for example. What's going on here and why is it helping us harmonize this?
So blue light blocking glasses are very well known, especially for the evening, because you wear them when the sun goes down and they basically tell your brain, okay, the sun's down, I'm going to block this blue light so I can start to release melatonin and sleep naturally. People understand that like immediately when you explain it. Okay, sun goes down, it's dark outside, my brain should register that it's dark outside, starts making melatonin, I get tired, I sleep, I heal. That's what happens when we're in nature. And in the modern world, that's disrupted, as I shared from the beginning. By wearing a pair of we have these lenses, which are kind of an orange, reddish, which I'm sure you guys have all seen if you're all kind of biohackers. It's a reddish orange lens, which filters those wavelengths to make you tired and go to sleep. So it's filtering pretty much all of the short wavelength light, blue and green. So those are the wavelengths which are stimulating. That's for the evening. I explained this first because to put into context the yellow lenses. People then say, well, why would I wear blue light filtering lenses during the day? Don't I want to have blue light all day long? And the answer is kind of. You want blue light when you wake up in the morning to activate your system. But again, going back to our evolutionary biology, the vast majority, like on tens of millions of years, we were primates and trees with green light and tons of near infrared, which is enough light to keep us awake and stimulated. There's still a little bit of blue, but not chronically stimulating the stress hormones. Again, the reason this system exists in many ways is when we move under the open sky, we lost our hair, we're not covered in hair like our ancestors, to be able, for many reasons, but basically thermoregulation, being able to regulate under the open sky. So the stress hormone effect that we get from all of our modern lights, I said earlier, they mimicked modern lighting off of the open sky environment. When we're under these lights, we're being stimulated as if we were about to go hunt, fish, forage, or migrate under the open sky, which means
the day.
And the peak of the day, which means more cortisol, which means you're more stressed, cortisol, it helps to regulate inflammation, but the biggest thing it does is a glucocorticoid, which means it mobilizes glucose, which is sugar, which is energy. So when you need to move, hunt, fish, forage, migrate, you need sugar in your muscles so you can move and survive. So cortisol goes up under the influence of blue light. Cortisol mobilizes glucose from your liver, glycogen, and then you can go and do things, let's just say in the case you haven't eaten a meal, which in most of evolutionary history wasn't 5 hours ago, it might have been days prior. So that's what cortisol does. And it also, makes you feel quite activated, kind of like coffee.
Yeah.
So do we really want to have our stress hormone system? I didn't repeat, but there's the adrenal corticoids, mineral corticoids, and others that help regulate fluid balance, and sweating, and all the other things you need when you're hunting, fishing, foraging, migrating under an open sky, which wasn't the default. So you really want that running all day long, that system, when you're sitting at your desk trying to work on your laptop? I would say no, because you're just going to be stressed. It's like your heart's going to beat faster against a closed system. Your sympathetic nervous system is going to be activated constantly, and eventually you burn out and you crash. So these lenses are kind of like a light version of the evening lenses. They're reducing the overstimulation so you can maintain a state of balance. We call these daylight lenses. My company's called Raw Optics. I guess you mentioned that at the beginning. But anyway, so these are just designed to help create a state of hormonal balance and neutrality during the day, similar to what we would have experienced in the green canopy where we spent millions and millions of years.
Yeah.
So that's the gist of.
So it brings us back into balance. And I think that's the really key thing, is that we can't avoid the modern technology. We can't avoid these lights at all times.
You can try.
We can try, but we're able to bring ourselves into balance when we understand how light can harmonize us. And I think
You would still use clock code.
within the conversation of light, though, there are some people that say UVB, if it hits your skin, you're going to be damaged and you're going to be severely destroyed. But then there's other people on the other side of the pendulum that say sun is the best thing, therefore sun equals really good, let me go out from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So what's your take on where we stand with how much light to take, when to take light?
Yeah, this is the part where I get attacked. No, just kidding. So basically, this is it's a contentious subject, especially in the biohacking world. So basically, there are so many reasons, and I don't even know all of them, but throughout history and evolution, for example, when you drink water, do you know when you've had enough water, typically? Or can you just drink an infinite amount of water? You can't drink an infinite amount of water. Within a minute, you can consume, I think, a liter or two. You could try to consume more. You could die from consuming too much water. But there's a very strong, immediate reflex of like, I've drinking enough water, right? The same goes for air. Like, you can't consume too much air because your lung capacity is limited. And the amount of air you can consume with your full lung capacity rapidly will be limited by the fact that you'll pass out pretty quickly when you upset your oxygen and carbon dioxide balance past a certain degree, right? People do it for all sorts of amazing experiences. Shout out Wim Hof and so on. The point is, things like breathing and water consumption are naturally limited by our physiology, let's say. Sunlight exposure, on the other hand, there are certain warning mechanisms for excess sun exposure, like you get hot, you get a sunburn, and so on. But they're not as immediate. A sunburn shows up sometimes hours later, unless you're really, if you notice that you have a sunburn and you're still in the sun, you're 2 hours too late, approximately, just for perspective. So what happens is that humans evolved sort of cultural ways of communicating certain things. This is just one piece of our amazing culture that we developed as humans over all sorts of societies over hundreds of thousands of years. But people understood that, okay, that like somebody else in the tribe got sunburned, we're not going to do that again. You know, everybody sort of came to understand this is not something you want to do often. And more than likely, if you were a human back in the day, if you got sunburned, you'd probably avoid doing it again, unless you really had to. You'd protect your skin, you'd wear a rice farmer hat as much as you could to protect yourself. So, of course, there are some groups of humans that worship the sun and bathe in the sun historically, and it was used as a medicine. The title of this talk is Light as Medicine. So, would you take any medicine in unlimited doses? No. Why? Because medicine there's a famous Latin saying, the dose makes the poison, right? So, the dose makes the medicine, but it also makes the poison. So if you take too much of any medicine, it's no longer medicine. And sunlight's actually the same. And this is where, unfortunately, both sides have kind of gone wrong. So as time went on, in the modern world, you have the World Health Organization and others basically saying in the last several decades, sun is a carcinogen, so you should basically avoid sun completely. You should not sunbathe, and you should wear SPF or sunscreen all the time, everywhere you go. Now, that's a whole separate issue, which, unless you want to get into it, I'll avoid, but SPF, sunscreen, many of them have been recalled, and most of them contain carcinogenic chemicals, unfortunately. So if I use sunscreen, I use mineral sunscreen because it doesn't seep into your bloodstream after being oxidized by sunlight. But that's what people are being told to do all the time. And in a way, it makes sense for the masses because it requires a huge amount of knowledge and the ability to hold a lot of complexity in order to diligently manage sunlight exposure like a medicine in a way that maybe the World Health Organization assumes the average person can't do. Well, I kind of think differently. I think if people get the information, then they can make better choices. And that's what we're here doing today. So on the other hand, in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, you've had what I would call a very extreme movement come out in the circadian health and wellness community, and the biohacking community, which is basically saying that you can't get too much sunlight, get as much as you possibly can, max out all the time, and sunburns are even good for you. It's gone that far. And I actually believed a lot of that for the longest time because I was so desperate, and some of the people I learned from who shared a lot of this relevant information, which I'm kind of passing along today, about mitochondria and light and how it affects us, we're coming to these further conclusions. So I thought, well, this must be true too, because the other part made sense. And so I started kind of constantly overdosing on sunlight for years and years and years, from when I learned about this when I was 16 to maybe 21, 22. And I think it definitely had a negative effect, for example, on myself, like not just on skin, but I use a lot of red light therapy, and I'm quite young, I'm 26 still, so I can, do a lot of things to offset these risks. But I would not recommend that anybody go out and do that. And not just for cosmetic reasons, but also because it's not a good idea. If you overdose on sunlight, your body has to use so many resources to basically manage the thermoregulation, like sweating, but to an extreme. I totally threw off my own internal balance by overdosing on sunlight for a long time. I just put it that way. It was to the extent where because our thoughts are so powerful, I believe that more sun is good for me. So even when my body was screaming like, dude, you've had enough, I would still get more sun, which is crazy. But that's something that, so Dr. Wunsch, who I mentioned earlier, he came out and he talked about the significance of light and health and how the World Health Organization has gone wrong, and how, for example, the banning of the incandescent bulb was a horrific idea until we came out with the solution like 2 months ago, literally the first healthy LED ever that has near-infrared light. That's a separate point. But anyway, then people, like biohackers, took his work and the work of others before him who were really, really diligent doctors thinking about light as medicine, and said, no, get as much as you can, so sort of misconstruing their work to kind of push a certain agenda, which is very, very sticky and attractive. When somebody says, oh, the sun is, get as much as you can, people are like, oh, that's the answer, it's that simple. So the thesis, you mentioned the synthesis and so on. So there's this idea that in any topic, you can have a thesis and an antithesis, and then somewhere in the middle is usually the synthesis, right? So the thesis of the World Health Organization was sunlight's a carcinogen, UVA, UVB, avoid it at all costs, never get anything. Well, we know that's wrong because the evidence now clearly shows, and there are more studies than the one I mentioned earlier, that's just one of the strongest, that if you avoid sunlight, your risk of death from all diseases, including a lot of cancers, goes up massively. On the other side, then, we have people saying, well, then get as much sun as we possibly can. But that's the antithesis. That's still not the synthesis. It's wrong because too much sunlight will cause skin cancer, and there's huge amounts of evidence. I can't believe I'm saying this on stage. Years ago, I would think it's crazy, but working with Dr. Wunsch, it took him 3 years just to kind of drag me out of to uncast the spell, let's say. So the synthesis is something like light is medicine. Everyone has to find the right dose for themselves, because if you're black or white or you have a different kind of skin, the time it takes to produce vitamin D in someone with the darkest level of skin is 6 times more than someone with the lightest type of skin. You can look up Fitzpatrick's skin type to get an idea of your own skin tone, but everyone has to dose your own sun exposure accordingly. And I just spoke with Dr. Wunsch yesterday, actually, in preparation for this discussion. So there's the term called erythema. It's when your skin turns pink from sun exposure. So basically, the only safe sun exposure, which is really supported by the evidence, is staying below the minimum erythemal dose. Or in other words, the amount of sun that it takes for your skin to turn pink, that is the max. So as soon as your skin gets a little pink, you're done. And you can build up your minimum erythemal dose over time by exposing yourself longer and longer to the sun, but then you have cumulative damage that does accrue over time. And so, if you're someone who is, you have to work outside, or you're going on a vacation somewhere sunny, then you can build up that exposure, but you don't necessarily want to max out all the time. Dr. Wunsch's perspective is that something like 15 to 20 minutes a day of midday sunlight is generally sufficient for someone to get healthy vitamin D levels on. Obviously, there are so many other factors, nutrition, the time of day. So the recommendation is to get sun in the middle of the day, even though it's the strongest, because you get the most UVB, so the most vitamin D, relative to UVA, which is more responsible for the aging and the other effects, over an extended period of time. So you get the highest ratio of UVB and vitamin D to UVA and the rest of the light in the shortest window of time. If you sunbathe midday, let's say between 11 and 1, just for example.
It requires that complexity holding, right? We need to be able to understand that it's all personal. My dose of sunlight will be different to yours, will be different to somebody else in the audience. And there's also the concept that we need to respect the cycles of the sun. Right? If I stay inside all year long, it's like, I think we're able to understand this when it comes to other things like working out. So if I was to lie on my couch all year long, and then I go to do a marathon in June, I think I understand that I'm going to have some serious problems with my body by doing that. But when we take it to light, if we're indoors all year round, lying down metaphorically, and then go to Jamaica, we're going to burn in the sun.
Yeah.
That's what we don't make the leg for. So I think it's understanding from what you're saying, the complexity that we need to respect the sun year round, build up that dose, and then be able to enjoy the fruits of the sun.
Yeah, and the evidence supports that erratic sun exposure, in other words, the weekend warrior or the, Cancun spring break warrior, that is the most dangerous type of sun exposure. So regular, consistent, measured exposure is the most beneficial. There were heliotherapists, there are doctors who used sunlight, heliotherapy, to treat all sorts of conditions in the early 1900s, especially in Switzerland. Auguste Rollier is one of the most famous, a French-Swiss physician, and they would basically take the patient's beds and slide them out onto a kind of terrace in the sun, and they would just expose their feet for 5 minutes for the first day. The next, and then they'd be in the shade. The next day, they would expose their feet and their lower leg. So 5 minutes on the feet, then 5 minutes on the lower leg, which meant 10 minutes total on the feet. And then they build that up all the way, so then upper leg, so thighs, then torso, then face, only if the rest of the body fully took the light, because the face is the most delicate and sensitive. And that's how they dose sunlight. Now, these are people with really severe illnesses like tuberculosis, severe wounds, kids with rickets and bone deformations and all sorts of other things. And they basically treated all sorts of diseases very successfully using sunlight. So it can be used as a very powerful medicine, and most people are tremendously deficient, what Dr. Foot calls anheliosis, so complete absence of light. And on the other hand, and many people go in overdose. So I don't think this is anything surprising for anybody in this room that the balance is somewhere in the middle, right? But it's kind of interesting that it actually has to be said, because in the biohacking world, it's swung so far to the other side of the pendulum that Dr. Wunsch himself, now he told me yesterday, he's like, the more that the extreme biohackers go this way, trying to say that sun is, the panacea, get as much as you possibly can, move to Costa Rica, move wherever, that the more he has to now clarify his position, that it's not just a free-for-all. Because originally he was just kind of fighting against, let's say, the World Health Organization. Now it's against the ones who want to swing to the other extreme, because it's really easy to think in simple terms. Like black and white thinking is really easy. The kind of complexity in the middle is quite a bit more nuanced and challenging.
Absolutely. And to take that understanding of the medicine is based on the dose, what is something that somebody in the audience tonight could do to optimize their light environment and bring light into being medicine for them, and say something tomorrow morning that they could do to bring it to be medicine for them?
Yeah, so for example, in the evening, you could use candles, you could use only warmer lights, you could wear something like our sunset lenses to filter this light to help wind down naturally and prepare your body for sleep. You could get light bulbs, for example. It's interesting. I'm normally not someone, I don't pitch my products generally. It's not something I just want to teach. That's actually how the company started. I was asking a podcaster if I could go on a show to talk about science. He's like, where'd you get those cool glasses? They were custom made. He was like, dealing with the company so difficult. And I realized I could make them. So that's how my company actually started 9 years ago. But the focus is on inflammation. So it just turns out that we're the only ones who have, at this point, or one of the only ones who have made a health. There's only one other company that has a human-friendly LED, which is basically an LED which has controlled blue light or optimized blue light, near infrared, so the most healing wavelengths, which were found in copious doses in incandescent bulbs and in sunlight. 40% of sunlight is near infrared. So it's a huge portion of what we get when we go outside. And it offsets, by the way, I didn't say this earlier, but that near infrared offsets to some extent the harm of the blue light and the UV light that's also contained in the sun. There are literally live cell images where you can see if a cell is exposed to blue light only, you can see the cells degrade, the mitochondria degrade based on a pigment which tags the cells and shows the activity and the health of the mitochondria. And then if you add back the near infrared, the cells look totally healthy as if they were exposed to near infrared only, which is where the cells also look totally healthy. So near infrared has this very strong protective effect, likely because just as UV and short wavelength blue light, HEVL as I call it, high energy visible light, cause damage and reactive oxygen species production in cells, phototoxicity it's called. Near infrared increases ATP, energy production in the mitochondria, and melatonin, the antioxidant, even during the day, not to make you sleep, but just to kind of keep your cells healing while the engines are running at the same time. As soon as we go in under these lights, there's virtually zero near infrared in here, unless there's something going on that I'm not aware of. The glass is designed to filter all of the near infrared because it heats the air more, so it makes the buildings more green. The irony is that it's the more green, the worse it is for your health, unfortunately, right now, because they're filtering the good near infrared. So you have blue and rich, short wavelength and rich light coming in. It's not natural light if it comes through a window. That's a really important point. So you have filtered light, then you have all these lights which are blue and rich LEDs, which also stimulate the hormonal system, and they don't have near infrared. Now, it sounds like doomsday. The good thing is we're fixing it. We are fixing this. So we've been working on developing, as I mentioned, human-friendly LED technology. We do have a product called Lumios, which is a standard A19 bulb. For those in the UK, you need a B22 socket adapter, but it works. And it is a lamp. Gone out a few of them, he quite likes them. That you can put anywhere to have visible light with near infrared at the same time. If you have a red light panel, very easy. Just put it on near infrared and just have it on, bounce, like reflect it off a wall, not directly onto you, reflect it off a wall, so it just fills up your room with near infrared light just all the time. Don't leave it running too close to your skin, because if you get near infrared to burn, it's a really deep burn, and just don't do that. But have it bouncing against a wall, and then you'll have near infrared in your indoor environment all the time. Open your window. Okay, I didn't answer your question. So in the evening, you can wear sunset lenses to help wind down. In the morning, you can go outside and get morning sunlight. It's very simple. Like Huberman, thank God for him, he's made this super mainstream, and we're very grateful for that. So those are two simple things anyone can do. And then I would say during the day, if you have to be indoors, you could wear something like our daylight lenses. You could also spend more time outdoors, ideally, but within reason, like not always in direct sunlight. I mean, I could keep going on. Indoor in cities, it's another thing. Cities are made of concrete, glass, steel, and asphalt, all of which absorb near infrared, good near infrared, and reflect UV and short wavelengths. So it's the exact opposite of our natural environment in the forest, where it absorbs the bad stuff, the more harmful stuff, and reflects the good stuff. In the city, it's reflecting the more harmful stuff and absorbing the good stuff. So getting into green spaces is the best thing ever. Fill your house with plants. Yeah. But if you fill your house with plants and the windows are closed, you still don't get near infrared.
But for that, actually, you caught a bit of fire, if we have 1 minute to discuss, about your blue sick lenses, which are actually designed for something like that. So they're a sunglass, which is a very bad thing to do if you're a circadian biohacker, which is what they say. But how does that help harmonize that environment to make it what it can be?
Yeah, so, this is a lot in a little amount of time. So basically, when I was in this more, I'll call it the extreme biohacker world that basically says more sun can't hurt you and get as much as you can. One of the other ideas that's thrown around very commonly, which I also shared on many podcasts, so my apologies to the world for this, which is that you should never wear sunglasses. That sunglasses are always bad because you're blocking the good light and you're disrupting the circadian rhythm and so on. So I understand why people say that, because I was saying that based on the same evidence. To put it simply, it's that the sun controls so many processes in the body. We don't want to disrupt that. We want this sort of natural feedback mechanism, which is partially true. If it's too bright outside and you put on sunglasses and then you sunbathe longer because if you're in bright sunlight, You put on your dark sunglasses. You're like, oh, I could just keep laying in the sun by the pool, covered in sun cream, which is getting photo-oxidized, which makes it carcinogenic, and then it's seeping in your bloodstream because that's where it goes. It doesn't just wash off of you. That's really bad because you're basically just removing this stress stimulus that would get you out of the sun potentially. So in general, I'm in favor of letting nature tell your brain that you've had enough, you maybe need to get out of the sun and so on. So we released a lens that the idea of my scientific advisor was that, people are indoors all day wearing these yellow lenses. Well, if they want to stimulate their circadian rhythm still to kind of keep active and wakeful, it would be cool if we could make a lens which stimulates the system and lets in the beneficial blue light, which is stimulating, for brief kind of measured periods of time. So we created a lens which is bluish called Blue Sync. So it basically filters the more harmful short wavelength light, which is UVA, UVB, and short wavelength blue light, HEVL, while letting in the stimulating blue, the one that we want to be active and functional, especially when we're outdoors moving about, doing things. And then it also lets in the healing red and near infrared wavelengths. So that's basically this lens. And as Con said, yeah, we caught a bit of flack because people were saying, oh, you should never wear sunglasses. But actually, I've come to believe it's a pretty good idea to wear sunglasses if you're going to be outside for extended periods of time, especially in really strong sun, especially if you go somewhere tropical where your eyes and skin didn't evolve. I spent a lot of time personally in Bali, and yeah, there's really, really strong sun there. So this is the idea. And our goal with all of our products is just to basically create technologies that makes it easier for people to have a healthy and coherent light diet. One more thing on Bali. It didn't hit me until some random guy I met there actually mentioned it. We were talking about do you want to live here long term? And he said, the old people here look really bad. And I thought about it. I was like, oh my gosh. So the people who protect their skin and cover their skin, which is their culture, they have houses which create a lot of darkness and shade. They don't have these huge glass windows which are letting in so much high intensity visible light and basically allowing this damage for our skin. They have lots of shade. They cover themselves. This is their culture. They know even when they're the ones with the dark skin, which is adapted to that light, they still protect themselves. And the ones who don't were the ones who have to work out in a rice field for their entire life. I see people who look like they're 80 or 90. They might be younger. They look really, really beat up, like really deep, long wrinkles. And I started to think about it. These people followed the extreme biohacker light diet to a T. They were out in the sun all day long for decades, and they look horrible. And so, not that cosmetics are the only goal here. I tell people you should get sunlight, even if it increases your risk of skin cancer a tiny bit, which it can, especially if you overdose. You should still get sunlight because it's going to reduce your risk of 100 other cancers. And that's really important. And neurodegeneration, and obesity, and hypertension, and diabetes, and metabolic dysfunction. So,
I think the key takeaway here is that the dose makes the poison, the dose makes the medicine, and we need a lot of sunlight, not too much sunlight, and we all have the correct intuition to know what is what, and that's going to help us harmonize our light and our life even more. So, Matt, thank you so very much for this conversation and your expertise, and yeah, Maruca, everyone, thank you.